And I will start first by turning to our court reporter. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm still closing all these other.
No problem.
Okay, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I will get started. Welcome back. It is after lunch, 1:34 on August 29th. And we are picking up where we left off with the hearing with respect to the proposed Sites Reservoir project. We had heard from panel 3 by the Sites Project Authority, and we were partway through cross-examination. I believe where we left things off was turning to Mr. Busher for questions from you. If does that seem right, Mr. Busher?
I think so.
All right.
I'm ready whenever everyone is.
Great. We will get I think the witnesses repinned up here, if you will. I think it's like an Easter egg hunt in the Zoom room. You have to find everyone. There we go. All right, there we have it. And with that, I will turn questions over to you, Mr. Busher.
Thank you, Officer Kenzie. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Busher. I'm the managing attorney at San Francisco Baykeeper, one of the protesting parties in this proceeding. I want to thank you all for your time today and for answering my colleagues' questions and my questions as well. With that out of the way, I want to start with just a couple quick questions for, I think it's Dr. Davids and Dr. Sadat and Dr. Winslow. This morning, Mr. Micco testified that there was some modeling done of Reclamation's involvement, where Reclamation was involved at 16% rather than the alternative 3 modeling at 25%. My question for the 3 of you is whether you've received outputs from a CalSim analysis which modeled Reclamation at 16%.
I could start with that. My renewed understanding after the lunch break is that our 2035 alternative 3B simulation, which I reported on in detail in my testimony, does reflect the 16%. The EIR alternative 3, which I compared my 2035 alternative 3B results to, reflects 25%. So I have received and have simulated both 25 and 16% involvement. That wasn't the only change in those comparative runs. There were multiple changes, but those changes were included.
And Dr. Winslow, have you performed any modeling based on that 16% output other than the 2035 3B simulation that you just described?
I have not.
Okay. And for Dr. Sadat and Dr. Davids, have you received any of the CalSim outputs of modeling done with Reclamation at 16%?
My understanding is that I relied on the alternative 3A outputs from CalSim 2, which would be the 25%, which is reflected in the final EIR EIS.
And I appreciate that that's how what your testimony relies on. My question's a little bit different. Have you received, to your knowledge, any outputs from a CalSim 2 model at 16% Reclamation involvement?
I have not received those outputs, no.
Thank you. And Dr. Sadat, same questions for you.
So as far as the results presented in my testimony that I talked about today, it was the 25%. But I did have received the 16% through for the 2035 CT modeling that we did for just a different purpose. That's my understanding. I believe I received those CalSim results.
Okay, and when you say the 2035 modeling for a different purpose, are you referring to the same thing or something different than what Dr. Winslow was referring to?
Same analysis that Dr. Winslow is referring to.
Okay. And are you aware of any analysis based on CalSim 2 results at 16% that you've performed separate from what Dr. Winslow and you just described?
Other than what Dr. Winslow is referring to, no, I'm not aware of anything else.
Thank you. And then I think this is a question for you, Mr. Whittington, although Mr. Micco, you may also, well, it may be for both of you. When you were testifying about the Shasta exchanges and the Central Valley Project operational flexibility, all of that modeling was based on 25% involvement, correct?
For alternative 3. And my testimony only concerned alternative 3.
Okay.
Right.
And Mr. Micco, is that consistent with your understanding?
Yes, that is consistent with my understanding. Alternative 3 at 25%. The results that were displayed this morning, as I believe Mr. Schutz was asking Mr. Whittington questions, were results comparing no action alternative to alternative 3, which was a 25% reclamation investment.
Thank you. And is it correct to?
I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm having a little hard time hearing Mr. Micco.
Sorry, I'm a little bit raspy, so I'll try to speak up. Do I need to repeat anything?
If you could, or I can, that would be great. Thanks.
I'll do that to the best of my ability. Apologies again. My answer in summary is yes to Mr. Busher's question. The details were in looking at the exhibits that were presented as Mr. Schutz was asking questions of Mr. Whittington. We were looking at no action alternative and alternative 3. That alternative 3 did assume a reclamation investment of 25%.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Whittington, and again, Mr. Micco, feel free to add on or chime in. Is it correct to say that the impact of those exchanges and that operational flexibility that you testified about would be different at 16% than at 25%?
Could you define impact for me?
So you described the temperature-related impacts or potential temperature-related impacts, among other things, of the Shasta exchanges and the potential benefits or impacts that operational flexibility could provide through reclamation's conduct. Is it correct to say that whatever the impact of those exchanges and flexibility are different at 25% involvement versus 16% involvement?
So just to make sure I answer your question in the way that is in your head. With reclamation investment, they would have a different volume of water stored in Shasta, and that would have an effect on how much water reclamation could use as a participant in sites. Does that answer the question?
That also has an effect on how much water sites can then exchange to store in Shasta Reservoir, correct?
That is, I guess I'd say it's unlikely. I'd have to double check the numbers, but I don't believe that would have a large effect on the ability to exchange water between sites in Shasta per the stage operation.
So I want to understand this.
Okay.
Is it your opinion, based on the modeling that has been performed, that the effect of exchanges with Shasta are identical, regardless of reclamation's percent participation?
I guess I wouldn't say it was identical, but I would say it could very likely be similar.
Could very likely be different.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mr. Whittington, do you disagree with any of that?
No.
Okay, thank you. And then Mr. Micco, one other follow-up question for you. You said this morning, you were asked this morning whether you had met with state board staff about the modeling. I think you recalled, you said, I do not recall specifically. Do you recall that testimony?
I do.
when you say you may have met, but you do not recall specifically, can you give me, I mean, like, do you think the meeting happened and you don't know? Do you think it's really unlikely the meeting happened, but it could have? Or is that just 50-50 one way or the other?
I guess my perspective is that there were things were very active with the sites project for several years, and so I can't recall all the attendees at all the meetings that I participated in.
Do you recall any specific meeting with just sites, their agents, and state board staff?
I don't specifically recall attending a meeting with sites, its agents, and state board staff.
Thank you. Dr. Winslow, I have some questions for you about the modeling you testified about this morning and in your written testimony. Ms. Mullen, can we put on the screen Sites Exhibit 111, Dr. Winslow's written testimony at page 4, please? And if we could scroll down to paragraph 12, please. Dr. Winslow, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
So in paragraph 12, you say that all boundary inflows must be assigned a temperature, and that for the diversions, the temperature data was provided by the HEC 5Q model of the Sacramento River. Can you explain to me where that boundary is, right? Where something falls within, enters your model, where the physical location of that boundary inflow is?
Yeah, the reservoir model is specific to the surface water extent of the reservoir. So we don't include any of the conveyance pathways to it.
Okay. And so when you say the boundary, that's at the point you're assigning a temperature at the point where that water is entering the reservoir, right?
Correct.
Okay. And am I correct in understanding that the temperature data from the HEC 5Q model is the temperature at the point of diversion in the Sacramento River?
That is correct.
Okay. And does that mean that the input temperature for the reservoir assumes no change in the water temperature between the point of diversion and the point of entry in the reservoir through those two canals?
The results presented in the EIR and in my testimony as of today do not reflect any changes in temperature between the Sacramento River and Sites Reservoir. That is correct.
And is that because the model just simply doesn't account for any change, or because there isn't, the model accounts for it, but there is in fact no change between those 2 points?
No, the model doesn't impart any change. The model does not account for that any increase in temperature or decrease in temperature during transit between the Sacramento River and Sites Reservoir.
Okay, thank you. And is it correct to say that the model then treats the temperature of the water that is diverted the same, whether it's diverted in January or June 13th?
Well, the 5Q results would have different values during those seasonal cycles, but those seasonal cycles were not adjusted before they were put into the Sites Reservoir.
Okay, thank you. Is it correct, Dr. Winslow, that there are no actual temperatures measured in those two canals between the diversion and the entry into the proposed reservoir?
To my knowledge, there isn't any consistent or detailed temperature measurements.
Did you ever request that temperature monitors be installed in those canals to obtain detailed or consistent temperature measurements?
I did not.
Thank you. Dr. Sadat, I have a couple questions for you as well about the site's release temperature modeling and testimony that you performed. My understanding is that the site's release temperature model accounts for warming of releases between where they exit the reservoir and where they join the Sacramento River. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And that warming is analyzed for the time, or is it correct to say that that warming is modeled based on the time that the water spends in the Tehama-Colusa Canal?
The model is based on a monthly time step. If that answers the question.
So it doesn't, but that's my fault, so fair enough. I think it answers the question I asked, not the one I want an answer to. So let me try this differently. Is there any warming that occurs in the model when the water is in the Colusa Basin drain?
Just the length of the canal is considered. So, and when water travels through the canals, yes, that warming is estimated, like through when the water travels through those canals.
When you say those canals, what are you including the Colusa Basin drain in those canals category?
The TCC, and then the GCID, and then yes, the Colusa Basin drain.
Does the model proportion the warming that occurs as between the 40 or so miles in the TCC and the 13 or so miles of the Colusa Basin drain?
Yes, those we have the length of each of those, and those are taken into account based on the length of the canals.
And is the warming rate consistent between those two structures or conveyances?
It is.
Okay. Is the warming, well, does the model assume that the warming of releases from sites reservoir is linear as it flows downstream?
It does.
And then I have a couple of other questions. I didn't understand part of some of the tables that are informing this. Can we look at Ms. Mullen, AHO Exhibit 139 at page 8? Thank you very much, Ms. Mullen. Dr. Sadat, do you recognize the table 6D3 that's on the screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I'm going to focus on the observed column for a second. Can you describe for me where Knight's Landing Ridge Cut at Highway 113 is with respect to the Colusa Basin drain?
There are like very inclusive basin drain exactly you're referring to.
I'm sorry, one more time.
So where exactly inclusive basin drain you're referring to, like Nice Landing and where inclusive basin drain?
Let me ask the question differently. The observed column identifies water temperatures, average monthly temperatures, both in the Sacramento upstream of the Colusa Basin drain, correct?
Correct.
And that would be upstream of where water from the drain re-enters the river or enters the river?
That's where it was the Sacramento River above Colusa Basin drain. That's before Colusa Basin drain discharges to Sacramento River.
Thank you. Where's the Knight's Landing Ridge Cut at Highway 13?
That's downstream of Colusa Basin Drain, like Donegan Pipeline and downstream of Colusa Basin Drain.
I'm sorry, you kind of cut out. I want to make sure I get every word. That's downstream of Colusa Basin Drain.
Yes, correct.
I didn't get the rest of your answer.
That's I guess that's adequate enough. So that's, yes, downstream of the Colusa Basin Drain.
And is that going to be an approximation for the average monthly temperature of the water that is coming out of Colusa Basin Drain?
Objection vague as to that.
Good. Dr. Sadat, do you understand the question?
Can you repeat the question?
Is the observed average monthly temperature provided in this table at Knight's Landing Ridge Cut at Highway 13, is that equivalent to the water that is coming out of the Colusa Basin Drain?
It's not, because the distance is also taken into account. So the distance from this location to where the water comes out of the Colusa Basin Drain, that distance is also taken into account, which is about 10, 11 miles.
And I'm sorry, this measurement, temperature measurement, is 10 or 11 miles before the Colusa Basin Drain discharges into the river?
I believe so.
And is it fair then to think about this in terms of the temperature, average monthly temperature of the water in the Colusa Basin Drain 10 or so miles before it re-enters the Sacramento River?
It's actually, well, I think it's after, if I'm correct. It's Mr. Miko can correct me, but I believe it was after.
If it's okay, Mr. Busher, may I add?
Please.
So the Knight's Landing Ridge Cut at Highway 113 is downstream of the Colusa Basin Drain. And its distance, the distance from that location to where the Colusa Basin Drain enters the Sacramento River, I don't have an exact number for you, but it's relatively short. I'd say it's roughly 1 mile.
From the observed temperature location to the discharge of
Yeah.
the drain to the river. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
And is that then, right, if we look at June, for example, in the observed column, right, 80.37 degrees, is that the temperature of water in the Colusa Basin Drain at that point?
I would, it'd be my opinion that yes, it would be the temperature of the Colusa Basin Drain.
All right, thank you. So this table shows that the observed and estimated temperatures of water for June and July are basically 80 degrees, tiny bit over, correct?
I would say yes, roughly the numbers in the table for the Knight's Landing Ridge Cut at Highway 113 for the months of June and July are roughly 80 degrees Fahrenheit.
And then Ms. Mullen, if we can take this down and look at AHO 141 at page 35, please. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. And if we can look at this first table here, this is, well, either Mr. Miko or Dr. Sadat, do you recognize this table?
Yes, I recognize the table.
Okay. And this is the water temperature in the Colusa Basin Drain in June, correct?
Yes, more specifically, this is the water temperature in the Colusa Basin Drain where the Donegan pipeline enters the Colusa Basin Drain in June.
Okay, so this shows under the no action alternative that water temperature is pretty consistently just under 80 degrees, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Is there a reason why the average temperature for the Colusa Basin drain in this figure is different than the estimated or than the observed temperature in the prior table?
Yes.
Can you explain that to me?
Yes, the difference in that temperature accounts for the distance between the 2 points where we're reporting temperature. So as I mentioned, and as Dr. Sadat testified, there's I can't quote you on the rough number. You can correct me. Roughly 10 miles between these 2 points.
Okay, and this point is 10 miles, give or take,
upstream. And per the assumptions of this tool, there is an adjustment in temperature under certain distances, and so this reported temperature reflects that adjustment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think most of the rest of my questions are for Mr. Whittington, although again, if others have further answers, feel free to let me know. Mr. Whittington, during your summary presentation this morning, you described that there would be an increase in Delta exports of between 90,000 and 100,000 acre feet per year with the construction of the sites project, correct?
Yes, on the average annual basis over the 82-year period.
Correct. That,
I'm sorry,
am I correct?
I'm sorry, I might have missed that. On an average basis, like, could you repeat that answer?
Yes, that is the value on an average annual basis over the long term or over the 82-year simulation period of CalSim.
And am I correct in understanding that the simulation from CalSim includes existing export capacity as opposed to future export capacity?
Yes, I believe so.
And did you model as part of your work for Sites Reservoir what that increase in Delta export would be if the proposed Delta conveyance project was constructed?
No.
So, Mr. Whittington, yesterday, Miss Bozzoni testified that in her view, using long-term annual averages is not as useful or helpful as using monthly averages by water year types. Do you agree with that?
I think the object is vague as to helpful.
Respectfully, I don't think it was my word helpful. I think that was Miss Bozzoni's testimony.
You're essentially reframing the question and presenting it to him with that word in it, and asking if he agrees.
I don't think it was worthwhile to go back. Mr. Busher, can you try the question again? And I'll listen carefully.
Do you agree that using long-term and annual averages is not as useful as using monthly averages by water year types in determining or identifying impacts of the project?
I would say that both have their value. CalSim, one of the primary purposes of CalSim is to evaluate long-term trends. So in the case of CalSim modeling, there is value in evaluating on the long-term basis.
Do you agree that it is less valuable than the more granular month by month, water year by water year analysis?
Assumes facts, not in evidence as to granular.
I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead if you understand the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Like I said, both have their purposes. It'd be beneficial to evaluate the effects of the project, both on a long-term basis and, looking month by month or even sub-monthly.
Do you agree that over a long-term basis, there is a reduction in net delta outflow as a result of the project?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you agree that during the diversion season, there is a decrease in net delta outflow as a result of the project?
Yes.
Objection asked and answered. These questions were asked by Mr. Schutz this morning.
I think it's fine. This is not it's their own time, so overruled.
When you modeled when the CalSim modeling was performed here, is it correct that you modeled a diversion criteria of 10,700 CFS at Wilkins Slough?
Yes. Sites diversions are only permitted when the Sacramento River flow Wilkins Slough on the monthly average exceeds 10,700 CFS in those months.
Okay, so I think you anticipated my next question. The model assumes as a monthly average 10,700 as the criteria?
Yes.
So the model would allow diversions in months, even if many of the days within that month were below 10,700, so long as the average bumped up high enough.
Well, the flows are simulated on a monthly basis.
Okay. Did you model any, you also modeled diversion criteria of 5,000 CFS during September at Wilkins Slough, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you model any other CFS thresholds as diversion criteria at Wilkins Slough?
None of which are included in the final EIR EIS.
What was modeled that was not included?
I mean, I'm sure we've iterated through different criteria over the years in developmental models, but like I said, only developmental models, not complete models that we'd have a good basis of comparison to, I would imagine, as of now. At least to my understanding, or based on what I know.
And when you say developmental models, is that like drafts or iterations or internal only versions?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Are you aware of any, based on your experience with the CalSim 2 model, do you think that the outputs in terms of flows or temperature would be different if the diversion criteria at Wilkins Slough were something other than 10,700 CFS?
Yes. It depends on the magnitude you would alter it by, of course.
And so, if the limit were 14,000 CFS, you would expect a different output.
In my opinion, I don't think there would be a significant effect on sites diversions because, at least from what I recall, there isn't a huge frequency of flows in that range that are between 10.7 and 14,000 CFS.
Okay. Based on your experience with the model, where would you expect to see a material difference as that limitation increased from 10,700?
Yeah, I guess offhand, it's hard for me to say what the material increase would be. Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure I'd be able to answer that appropriately.
Okay. So I have some general and maybe some specific questions about what else you included in the model or what the results from the model tell you. First, were there any diversion criteria in the model downstream of Wilkins Slough?
Well, yes, the site's operations must abide by all of everything included in the regulatory environment of the no action alternative as well, which includes downstream flow requirements, delta outflow, flow requirements associated with salinity.
Okay. And that would be the existing biological opinions and water quality control plans, essentially.
Yes.
And that those were the baseline for the no action alternative, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Other than those baseline or regulatory limitations that exist without the project, were there any other diversion criteria downstream of Wilkins Slough?
Yeah, there is a requirement to ensure that size diversions doesn't encroach on excess flow conditions. So what we implement, I believe, a 3,000 CFS buffer to in surplus of whatever would be needed, whatever flow would be needed to provide for excess flow conditions. So sites diversions are constrained so that they would never drop the flow below that 3,000 CFS buffer, if that makes sense.
So I think so. Let me make sure. That's in connection with the determination by the Bureau and DWR of whether the delta is not in balance or in excess.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And so if the Bureau and DWR say at X thousand CFS flows currently, we are not in balance, we are in excess, sites adds 3,000 to that number before it to avoid, well, sites adds 3,000 to that number.
Yeah, that's my understanding of the implementation of that criteria.
Okay. Can you describe for me how the model determines whether the Bureau and DWR will find that the delta is not in balance?
To answer that, I'd have to look back through the code to answer with proper detail.
Where would I find that if I wanted to look at it?
And offhand, I'm not sure the best place to look.
Is that in the CalSim modeling?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if a lot of the modeling of the regulatory assumptions are included in Appendix 5B, which is titled Surface Water Operations or Modeling, I believe. So that would be my first recommendation to look. I'm not sure if there's anyone else in my team that may be able to add on to that recommendation.
Mr. Miko, in response to maybe I'm interpreting your question maybe too directly, but if you were to look in the modeling files, we could identify a file for you that would reflect the equations to represent the.
Mr. Miko, can you move closer to your mic or speak louder?
Sorry. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff between the laptop and okay. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. To directly answer your question, we could point you to a file location in the CalSim models that would demonstrate representation of the coordinated operations agreement and how the model may determine whether or not the system could be in balance conditions or not.
And I apologize. Is that what you are referring to part of the record? Do you know?
I do not know. I apologize.
Okay. And let me try this one other way. In terms of the regulatory conditions that the model uses in making that not in balance determination, are those the same regulatory conditions that exist in the no action alternative?
Yes.
Mr. Whittington or others, does the CalSim 2 modeling that you performed account for waivers of water quality protections?
Waivers or water quality protections? Is that, sorry, I was just making
Waivers
sure I
of,
heard you right.
I think I tried to say waivers of water quality protections. Temporary urgency change petitions or orders granting them.
No, the model does not include that.
Are you familiar with temporary urgency change petitions generally?
Yes, I am.
Do you know how many years out of the last 10 a TUCP has been issued for water quality in the Bay Delta, the Sacramento River?
I believe there were 2.
You're aware there was one in 2023, correct?
I believe so.
And that was a wet year, correct?
I actually don't recall.
Does the model restrict diversions to sites reservoir when a temporary urgency change order is in effect?
The model does not include that.
And Mr. Whittington, based on the modeling that you've performed, I'm curious if you're able to tell me, how often diversions would be occurring, right, based on conditions downstream of Wilkins Slough. Is that something that you're able to answer based on the modeling you've done?
So sorry. So your question is, sorry, could you repeat it one more time for me? Thanks.
Yeah, let me ask a specific one. We'll try it this way.
Yeah.
From the modeling that you have performed or that was performed in CalSim 2, can you tell me how often diversions would occur when delta outflow is less than 29,000 CFS?
That is something that I could tell you if I were to look into the results right now. I would expect that it is not a frequent occurrence, though, just offhand.
And when you say you could look into the results, where are you looking to be able, right, so that I can look at that and say, how often are diversions occurring at delta outflow above X or below X?
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to think of something that we've provided that would be good at showing this. We do have plenty of tools to look into that, where you'd be able to compare flows of diversions versus flows of downstream side by side. But for what's on record, I'm not sure what the best source would be. Because you're interested in seeing, in the same month, what the site's diversion is versus what the flow is, correct?
Correct, right? At a specific point, at a specific time of diversion, what are the flows, not at Wilkins Slough, but right downstream, delta outflow or at Freeport?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, on our record, I'm not sure if we've provided information to do that kind of an analysis, but we have it, it's it we've done those analyses ourselves, and in my opinion, just through remembering what the results looked like, I don't think that this would be a common occurrence with delta outflows being so low and sites diverting any water. Especially, sites is only diverting water primarily in months that coincide with delta outflow being greater in the winter time. So, I mean, as you know, sites diversions don't occur after June 15th.
Okay. So can I try and summarize that? Is it right to say that the CalSim model could provide that information, but that you're not aware of anywhere where that has been provided publicly or in this record?
In this record, I'm not aware if we have anything that's provided that would you'd be able to do a straightforward comparison of size diversions and downstream flows month by month.
Okay. And that's true for both delta outflow and for flows at Freeport, for example.
Yes.
And so a slightly different question on the same subject. Does the CalSim model, well, have you done any analysis for sites in the CalSim modeling where you looked at the frequency of specific thresholds of flows, right, at Freeport or delta outflow? How more or less often those flows would occur with the project?
Yes, yeah. Over the years, I believe such analyses have been done.
And would that answer the question, right? If I wanted to know, does delta outflow of at least 42,800 CFS between January and June become more or less frequent under operation of the project? That's information you have modeled.
Yes.
And where is that available?
Well, yeah, like I said, I don't know if there's on the record analyses where you could do that kind of comparison. Yeah, for the final EAR, which is what is mostly on this record, we didn't provide any of those kind of analyses doing the diversions versus downstream flow conditions on a month-to-month basis, at least.
Okay. In your experience, right, outside of the context of sites reservoir, are you familiar with CalSim 3?
Yes.
When was the first time you think you worked with CalSim 3 chronologically?
A, probably a little over a year ago, a year and a half or 2 years, maybe.
And are you aware of when CalSim 3 became available?
Well, I think it's had a few soft launches over the years, but it was used for the Delta Conveyance project, and that was published in July 2022. EIR.
You didn't participate in using it in those soft launches prior to that?
No.
Okay. Give me a second. I think that might be all I have. Let me just look at my notes real quick. Thank you, all five of you, for your time. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Busher. I will look back to the room. Is there anyone else from the coordinating NGO parties who has questions for this panel of witnesses? So with that, I will turn to you, Mr. Reese. Are you ready with your questions for this panel of witnesses?
I'm ready.
Great. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. I have questions for Mr. Whittington and Mr. Miko, and mostly Mr. Whittington. And I'll try not to, go into questions that have been asked and someone answered, but sometimes that's difficult just based on what just occurred. But I'll be cognizant of that. So, Mr. Whittington, and it just was alluded to a bit ago, with regard to CalSim 3, I just want to understand, did you say that CalSim 3 was used as part of the Delta Conveyance Project analysis?
For the final, or for the draft EIR in 2022, I think that's my first recollection of it being used for a public environmental report.
Okay. And I may have missed this earlier on, but just stating, confirming, but CalSim 2 was obviously used for the sites project analysis, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Why wasn't CalSim 3 used for the sites project analysis?
The development of the modeling for the final EIR EIS occurred before the availability of CalSim 3.
Okay. And sort of generally, or what are the most paramount differences between CalSim 3 and CalSim 2, if you know?
Extended hydrology. So instead of ending in water year 2003, it ends in 2021. There's also an increase in resolution of the model. So the number of nodes and arcs has increased that represent various flows or points of diversion, whatnot. And it also incorporates a more comprehensive estimate of groundwater use. Those are, I think, the top three that I would summarize.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I've questioned in previous cross-examination, and so have others, about long-term averaging. So don't want to beat that up, but I'm still sitting here and asking and thinking, could you provide an explanation, just sort of walk me through how long-term averaging works? I mean, how is long-term averaging calculated, if you will? Just sort of take me through that.
Sure. So it could be done on an annual basis or a monthly basis, but we're just looking at the average volume or flow rate associated with these various parameters over an 82-year planning period. So the average annual long-term value for a year, if we're thinking in terms of volume, we could look at the volume of water that was simulated for one full year and take the average of that for 82 years. In the charts that I presented, I also broke it up into different water year types. So, and that was based on the Sacramento Water Index. So there's different classifications based on the hydrology of each year. And if it's categorized as a wet year, then for those charts, we might just take the average of each of those wet year classified years. And that, might work out to around 20% or so of the entire 82-year period. And we could also look at long-term averages on a monthly basis by just taking out of the 82 years the average of each March that happened or each April or whatnot. And yeah, please feel free to ask more questions.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So for this analysis, for the sites project analysis, well, let's look at, if you go to slide 17, your slide 17 of your modeling results conclusions. Maybe we could pull that up.
What is the exhibit number?
It is Whittington is 278.
Thank you. And did you say slide 17?
I did.
Thank you.
So in looking at your modeling results conclusions on this slide, some say long-term average, the second one, for example, says long-term average deliveries. The fifth one talks about an increase of roughly 90 to 100,000 acre feet per year. I guess what I'm asking is, based on these conclusions, are all these conclusions all based on a long-term averaging over an 82-year period?
Well, yeah, the majority of the information I provided in this presentation, we're looking at a long-term average.
Okay. When you say the majority, is there some conclusions, any of these conclusions that are bulleted here on slide 17 that aren't based on long-term averages?
No, I guess not. Yeah, sorry. I think these are all long term. I broke it down by I showed a few I guess monthly pattern charts to give an idea of how flows may be fluctuating year round. But the long-term average, if you define it by looking at the full 82-year period, or looking at the full set of each Y-year type classification, that's all I'm reporting.
I'm sorry, you tailed off. What was that? I didn't hear the last part.
Yeah, to clarify and confirm what is included in this presentation is long-term average results, long-term average comparative analysis with sites and without sites.
Okay, so just all of the conclusions here, and these do represent your conclusions of your analysis, right, on slide 17?
Mr. Rees, may I add something briefly?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry if you can't hear me very well. I'll get closer. I just want to note that the first bullet, the last sentence, does include no substantial differences in simulated long-term average or critical year deliveries. So there's at least one noted on the slide that is not a long-term average. Sorry for interrupting.
I appreciate that. I want to understand that. So you say critical year delivery. So is that critical deliveries over the 82-year period?
Well, yeah. So it's only considering the critical years, which is a proportion of the 82-year period. So I guess that gets back to how we're defining long-term. And I guess maybe it's best to, for this presentation, long-term is considering the full 82-year period. regardless of year type. And then when I associate a water year type to the results, that is still an average annual number, but it's only associated with X percent of the 82 years.
Okay. So those critical year sub-analysis, if you were, sub-analysis is still averaged out over the full 82-year period, correct?
Well, there's going to be somewhere between 10 and 20% of the 82 years that are classified as critical years.
Okay, because those are the critical years that occurred during those 82 years.
Yeah, right.
Right. All right. Do you have any other modeling conclusions that are not set forth in these bullets?
Not in my testimony.
Okay. Did you use, as part of your analysis, did you use CalSim to model any project impacts, any project impacts to salinity levels in the central and south delta?
So CalSim does consider X2 location, and it does need to comply by the D1641 X2 requirements. So CalSim has what's called an artificial neural network to come up with a relationship between flow and salinity. So based on that relationship, CalSim targets flow conditions at several different locations. There's 5 of them. There's the Sacramento River at Edmonton, and Collinsville and Chips Island, and then there's also the San Joaquin River at Jersey Point, and also there's a compliance point at Rock Slough. So CalSim operates to meet the salinity standard at each of those locations.
Okay, and so did you do an analysis on as to whether or not there were impacts to salinity or increases to salinity in the central and south delta using CalSim?
There is a way to interpret results from CalSim. I believe the CalSim doesn't show too much discrepancy in or too much effect from sites operations on salinity levels, but it is looked like that analysis is better represented by the DSM-2 modeling.
Okay, and I'll save the DSM-2 questions for Mr. Herrick, but you said that you believe there wasn't too much effect on salinity just now. Is that opinion in terms of not too much of effect, is that also based on long-term averaging?
Yes, and year type averaging, and looking through our post-processing tools that we use to evaluate the results of CalSim outputs, we can I have looked at the results for various months and various year types, and at least in my opinion, when I have looked at those results, I did not see much of a change between with and without sites project.
for salinity increases in the central and south delta?
Well, I guess I'm more focused on the X2 values. So that's the closest to my expertise.
Okay.
That's to salinity.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you, as part of your CalSim 2 modeling for the sites project, evaluate impacts or effects on water levels in the south and central delta?
I'm going to object as the vague with respect to South and Central Delta based on Mr. Whittington's kind of refocus on those modeling locations and some indication that there may be not be clarity as to where Central and South Delta start relative to what he looked at.
Well, let me ask this then, to try to help with that. Did you, as part of your project analysis for sites, consider any impacts or evaluate any impacts to water levels anywhere in the delta?
Well, as part of the CalSim analysis, that was not one of the areas of focus.
Okay, so you didn't look at that. You didn't analyze that then, in other words.
I did not.
Okay. You talked about that that CalSim 2, a difference between CalSim 2 and CalSim 3 is the cutoff period for the hydrologic period. CalSim 2 ending in 2003, correct?
Yes.
As part of your analysis, did you do any additional analysis to include update or a hydrologic period that's more current, such as in CalSim 3, or did you stop at 2003?
In CalSim, we stuck with 2003. I was part of other efforts to look at potential effects beyond 2003. So, for example, we have a spreadsheet-based tool that estimates the potential, like the availability for potential diversions to sites project between water years 2008 through 2018. And that spreadsheet doesn't include the full sites operations. It doesn't include releases. And it resets, like the calculation resets every year. So it's only looking at how much water could possibly be diverted into sites based on the user specified physical constraints and regulatory constraints. And we use that tool, mostly as a way to check our CalSim modeling and see how it stacks up to both the more recent hydrology. But another thing I think I forgot to mention was this spreadsheet-based tool calculates diversions on a daily time step. So it was a way to look into how the effect of various criteria may have on a daily time step compared to a monthly time step. But yeah, so we have, I guess to answer your question, we have looked into how alternative 3 diversion criteria affects the project in more recent hydrology, not quite as recent as 2021, but at least up until 2018. And with CalSim, though, we just stuck with the CalSim 2 hydrology from 21 to 2003 because that was the best available version of CalSim that was publicly available at the time.
Okay, thank you. Based on your conclusions regarding an increase of south of Delta exports, you say that the net increase of between 90 and 100,000 acre feet. Is there a way, based on the modeling you did, to determine, in what month in any given year is the highest amount of increase in south of Delta exports?
Yes, there would be a way to get that number.
And how would I get that number?
Again, this is going back to a question that was asked previously on doing a month by month look into the results. I'm not sure if we have anything on record where we could do a month by month analysis.
Okay, but a month by month analysis that I'm talking about could be done.
Yes, it could.
Okay. All right, I have a couple questions for Mr. Micco. With regard to paragraph 7 of your testimony.
Could you put the testimony on the screen, please?
What is the exhibit number?
It is 108.
Thank you.
Paragraph 7.
I believe that's page 3.
With regard to CalSim 2 here, you indicate the model should be used with caution where absolute results are needed, et cetera. And I appreciate your candor with regard to that. But what could you expound on that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
On the last sentence, paragraph 7.
Yes, please.
So one thing to consider when evaluating CalSim 2 model results is that CalSim 2 operates on a monthly time step. And as Mr. Whittington has testified earlier, it has a method for estimating the salinity conditions in the delta in order to meet what I'm going to call D1641 compliance. However, the method for calculating salinity per D1641 compliance is at a sub-monthly time step. So the monthly decisions that CalSim makes are trying to capture a threshold that occurs at a sub-monthly time step. We, as in the authority, has presented results on water quality compliance per D1641 in the final EIR-EIS and include this sentence to caution readers on those results due to the fact that a monthly model is attempting to address a sub-monthly threshold.
Are you finished?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to draw your attention to paragraph 12 of your testimony. You say CalSim 2 results should not necessarily be understood to reflect actually what would occur under a stressed water supply condition. In actual operations, the CalSim 2 results, e.g. near a dead pool storage, would be avoided by making policy decisions. Are you referring to TUCPs?
That could include TUCPs.
Are there other types of policy decisions that you were referring to or implying in that paragraph?
There are.
And what are those?
That could include the construction of a temporary barrier.
Anything else?
Sitting right here, no, but I imagine there are.
Mr. Whittington answered several of the additional questions that I had for you. So I don't have any further questions for you, Mr. Miko. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to switch spots here for a second and not to fall down. Thank you. I'm John Herrick, Counsel and Manager, South Delta Water Agency. I appreciate the opportunity. Apologize for not having been on camera before, but I've been monitoring the proceedings.
Thank you and welcome, Mr. Herrick. And I'll ask my team if we can update our title here. We now have John Herrick with us. On
That
the Zoom.
doesn't matter.
So you'll be attributed appropriately. Well, we will.
I'm universally despised anyway, so it's better that I'm going under someone else's name here.
Go ahead, Mr. Herrick.
I'd like to start with an uncomfortable comment here, and that is that I understood from the earlier direct testimony, or excuse me, cross-examination, that the applicants haven't, or petitioners haven't modeled the scenarios that the State Water Resource Control Board asked them to model for this particular project. And those scenarios that deal with probable hydrologic conditions under changes to the water quality control plan. And since that's a likely occurrence in the next year or two, we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars as we go, and millions of dollars is being spent. And I question why we're proceeding absent the modeling that the state board requested.
I'd like to object. Is there a question here?
Let's get to a question, Eric. For the witness, please, not to me. Well, unless you really do have a question for me.
No, that was for the hearing officer. And I'm just asking them, shouldn't we, can I just make a motion? We should suspend the proceeding until they've complied with the state board's request for modeling. Maybe I've missed something, and maybe there's some testimony that's coming up that deals with that. But when the state board requests that an applicant model certain conditions that they think will be in existence in a fairly short period of time, and they don't do it, I don't know why we would proceed at all. So with that, I'll just say that's a motion, and hearing officer can deal with it as she sees fit.
I will take that under advisement. Thank you.
If that is a motion, then I guess I should need to respond. I would just offer that the state board noticed this application after submitting those comments and having an understanding of where the authority was headed with the modeling. So there was a clear understanding of what hadn't been done, and you'll see with the water availability panel that in fact some work has been done with respect to some of those flow levels that the state board was recommending should be looked at. So you will get some data in this hearing, but I would just turn back to it was the state board's discretion to proceed with this hearing, understanding where things were at.
Back to you, Mr. Herrick.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe this question is just a follow-up question on the CalSim 2. A couple of questions here. This will be for Mr. Miko and for Mr. Whittington, I believe. So let me just start with the first question is the diversions to sites are on or connected to the Sacramento River. Is that correct?
Yes.
And yes.
Yep. The two intakes.
Yes.
Red Bluff and Hamilton City. Right.
So as a hypothetical, and these are just made up numbers by me, say there's 100,000 CFS flowing into Shasta, and there's 50,000 CFS being released for downstream purposes, whatever that is, contractors or water quality for whatever. So that means 50,000 of the 100,000 going in is going into storage. Would you agree with that and under that hypothetical?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in any of your modeling, do you model the possibility that the Bureau, instead of releasing 50,000, releases 52,000, so that the 2,000 is pumped into sites rather than being in storage in Shasta?
Um, does the model make a decision for Shasta to release water specifically to be stored into sites? Is that the question?
Yes.
No, I don't believe it does that.
So to clarify, so none of your modeling results includes that possibility. Would that be a correct statement?
I don't believe it includes that.
Okay. And do you have an understanding that water in Shasta is burdened by various obligations to meet water quality standards? Do you understand that?
Yes.
And I believe it's your employer's position or the petitioner's position that sites water is not available to meet water quality standards. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm going to object as to vague with respect to available.
I believe.
Sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Herrick, because I'm not following the question, so it'd be helpful to me to understand more.
It's my understanding of a previous witness, I believe it was Ms. Forsyth said that water in sites will not be obligated to meet water quality standards, whether it's Bureau water, DWR water, or one of the other parties' waters. Is that your understanding, Mr. Whittington?
Well, the water included in Reclamation's invested account is could be used to meet, well, it can be used to meet water quality standards objectives that Reclamation has.
That may be, but the question was, is it burdened by those obligations under the permit that's being proposed here or sought here?
Sorry, could you be specific to what is being burdened?
Do you know if the site's permits will include or are seeking a condition that says DWR and USBR allocations are obligated to meet Delta water quality conditions?
Yeah, I'm not sure on that. And the model assumes that has assumptions that the Bureau would use the water for temperature management. And I think that's all I can speak to on that.
Okay. All right, let me move to Dr. Sadat, please. And Ms. Mullen, if you could bring up, it's sites 255. I don't need it right at the moment, but it's a map. I'm just going to refer to that. And it says at the bottom, page 19. So I'll be starting there in a second. So, good afternoon, Dr. Sadat. Get my papers here. You say in your testimony early on that use of the DSM-2 is the best available science. Is that correct?
I believe I did say that, yes, that it's the best available tool for planning simulations.
Okay, so I'm going to explore that conclusion with my following questions. So I just want to, if you can keep that in mind as I go through these questions. The version of DSM-2 you used is DSM-2 8.0.6. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the date of that version is 2010. Is that correct?
I can't remember the exact date that that version was released.
Are you familiar with the fact that there are versions 8.1.2, 8.2.0, 8.2.1, 8.3.0, and 8.3.1, and 8.4.0?
Well, I'm aware that there are there are recent releases of DSM-2 after 8.06. So I'm aware that there are some versions that they have been released after that version used here.
And if I were to represent to you that version 1.2 was in 2013, 2.0 was in 2020, 2.1 was in 2021, 3.0 was in 2023, 3.1 was in 2023, and 4.0 was in 2024. Does that sound right to you?
Well,
if you know.
I don't remember the exact dates of the releases, but there are more recent.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't have used a version in 2013 rather than one that was a 2010?
I believe because that version was used for the 2019 biological opinions, and it was used by Reclamation and DWR. And then Sites Authority wanted to replicate the modeling that was done by those DWR and Reclamation for the long-term operation, and then the 2019 and 2015 biops.
So you used the 2010 version because older processes than this use that version. Is that what you just said?
I'm going to object. Assumes facts not in evidence with respect to 2010. She said she didn't know when 8.0.6 was published.
I think she said it was 2010.
I recall her saying she wasn't sure about the exact date.
Okay.
But
I think the question can still stand.
Yes, without the 2010 reference, yes.
Can you please repeat the question?
Yes. Is there a reason? Oh, excuse me. I was trying to summarize and understand your last answer, and I said you used the 2010 version and not later versions because the 2010 version was used in prior processes than this. Is that correct?
Again, objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. We haven't. It hasn't been established that 8.0.6 was
Mr. Ferguson,
published in 2010.
I heard you. Thank you. Mr. Herrick, if you would please refer to the version number, which I think we can all agree on.
Yeah, well, the witness did say there were later versions, so I'm not sure what the objection is trying to get to here. But
the objection is getting to you referring to this as the 2010 version when we haven't established it is the 2010 version. Although I would imagine we could establish that.
Yeah, that's pretty easy to do.
That would connect the two, and then we could avoid
okay.
All right.
Is it correct that
there was overlap? I didn't get all that exchange.
I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Sadat, the reason you used the 8.06 version and not later versions was because that earlier version was used in earlier processes than this one. Is that correct?
As far as to my knowledge, that was not the only reason. I believe that DSM-2 is used to train ANN, which is used in CalSim 2. And I believe that version was the one that was used to train ANN in CalSim 2. So to be consistent with that, with the ANN process, we use that version. I believe the recent versions that was released after 806 was not did not use the same ANN.
Do you know if any of the versions after 8.0.6 had differences in bathymetry in those newer versions?
Can you be specific which version?
The question was if you know if any of those other later ones had different bathymetry than the bathymetry in the 8.0.6.
I can't remember exactly.
Is it important?
There are some improvements in the model. Yes, I agree, but I can't remember exactly what are the improvements in which version. But as far as the bathymetry, I can't recall.
And would you agree that the bathymetry in the model being used is very important in having the model results be accurate?
Well, could you be more specific? Like when you're talking about if it's accurate, what do you mean by be more accurate?
I'm going to ask an intervening question, which is, I'm not even going to get the word right. What is bathymetry? Is that the correct term, Ms. Dr. Sadat?
Bathymetry.
And with the B, bathymetry?
Bathymetry. And how do you spell it? Maybe the court reporter knows this, but I don't. How do you spell it?
Sorry, BATHYMETRY.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And Dr. Sadat, can you briefly tell me what your understanding of bathymetry is?
Well, I believe Mr. Herrick is referring to the channel geometries that is defined in DSM-2.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I apologize for interjecting.
No, I should have laid that groundwork. I'm sorry. Let me go back a little bit then. Dr. Sadat, the DSM-2 calculates through various uses various calculations to I don't want to use predict, but to determine how water flows from one place to another and what changes in temperature, salinity, or stage or flow, all those things, how it moves through that system, correct?
Correct.
And the bathymetry is the, as you said, channel geometry. And so the channel geometry is what DSM-2 thinks the size of the channel is where the water is moving, correct?
Yes, correct.
And if we have, are you aware of any siltation problems in the South Delta that have changed the bathymetry over the past 10 years, say?
Not aware of the specifics, but I know that the sedimentation and erosion happens to channels, but I'm not aware of a specific situation in a specific area.
Hypothetically, let's say that a channel such as Middle River under the 8.0.6 version has a channel, and I'm just making this up, has a channel that's 30 yards wide and 6 feet deep. But in the last 10 years, that channel is now 10 yards wide and 2 feet deep. Would that make a difference in your confidence in the results of the model?
Well, there is, I believe this is also mentioned in the testimony that DSM-2 results are not to predict. They are used as a comparative analysis. And what I did was comparing no action alternative against alternative 3. And I believe if there is any bias or like this channel geometry is wider or deeper or whatever differences is, this bias is captured in both alternatives. So I don't believe that would be too much of a concern where we are comparing apple to apple.
Yeah, I was going to get to that later, but let me just touch on it now. When you're comparing the two scenarios and you come up with a difference in the scenarios, that is then used by you to determine whether or not it's a significant impact, correct?
Can you be more specific?
So if you run the baseline case with alternative 3 and you come up with, and I'm just making this up, you come up with a half-inch difference in stage, that's, you look at that half-inch and then make a determination whether it's significant or not, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, so you're just comparing the two to see what the difference is. Now, sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
So don't you need to know how that half-inch affects any particular water user before you determine it's significant or not?
I mean, that depends how much that difference is. In our case, when I looked at the results, when I compared the minimum water levels between the two scenarios, I see that the differences are less than 1/10 of a foot. So when their difference is
I'm sorry,
small,
but they're listed at what per fruit? I missed that. They were listed as,
which part?
when I compared minimum water levels between the two scenarios, I see that the differences are listed as
Less than 1/10 of a foot, 0.1 foot.
And 1/10 of a foot is 1.2 inches per your testimony, right?
Right.
In your conclusion then about whether that's a significant impact, how do you know that that 1 inch is important or not to anybody's diversion in the South Delta?
Based on a general understanding on the South Delta situation, and then comparing to the water level.
Okay, so you didn't do any investigation to see if there were areas experiencing low water level problems that another inch might or might not be important. Is that correct?
My understanding is the temporary barriers are installed in the south of the Delta to help mitigate those issues. That's as far as I know.
So let's go to that. We're jumping all over here. That's not your fault. the temporary barriers are rock structures put into the 3 channels in the South Delta generally every year. Is that correct?
No, there are three different locations, but
I thought I said that.
yes. So,
Rock
yeah.
structures put in 3 different channels, correct?
I'm not sure about the structure, so I don't know what structures they are. I just know that there are 3 barriers in the south.
Okay. So, all right, let me jump around here. Sorry, I'm just trying to follow your answers. Do you know that DWR has a web address for people to complain about water level problems?
I do not.
So you don't know then if people complain about water level problems when the barriers are in, do you?
I do not, but I've seen reports that people were saying that those barriers actually help with their water levels.
Really?
But I haven't looked at all the reports, or I haven't checked this website.
Excuse me for laughing, I'm sorry. Okay, so DWR is one of the participants in the sites project, correct?
I don't know the answer. I believe so. Is it? I don't know.
So DWR hasn't informed you of water level problems when barriers are in?
I haven't been informed.
Has any of your team informed you of their discussions with South Delta Water Agency that dealt with these sort of water level issues?
I mean, I might have heard this conversation has come up, but not specifics.
Okay. So you didn't think it was important to investigate whether or not there are actual water level problems occurring in the South Delta?
Objection argumentative.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You can, I mean, I think after this, Mr. Herrick, I think we're ready to move on, but go ahead,
Okay.
Dr. Scott.
Can you please repeat the question?
Well, you said that you had heard something about those sort of problems with water levels. And then I asked you, you didn't think it was important to investigate those as part of your analysis. So it's not meant to be argumentative, but it may sound that way.
Well, let me correct myself. I've heard about this throughout this testimony process, not before that.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, let's go back to the beginning here. Do you know, is the maximum amount of increased exports at any time sites water is being released? Is that 1,000 CFS? Is that correct?
I don't know the exact numbers from CalSim, but that sounds about right.
Yeah, do any of the CalSim guys use the expression, isn't that the maximum release back into the river, the 1,000 CFS? Anybody?
Yes, the 1,000 CFS is the maximum conveyance capacity of the Dunnigan pipeline, which is the release mechanism of sites.
And Dr. Sadat, your operation of DSM-2, what does it assume about who, and by who I mean DWR or the Bureau, who might export that 1,000 CFS if it reaches the Delta for exports?
These assumptions are all implemented in CalSim. So DSM-2 does not a specific, like, it's not implemented in DSM-2. So I was not involved with those assumptions, like the implementation of those assumptions.
Okay, but the operation of DSM-2 then has to have a number on what pumping plant is exporting that water, doesn't it?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, we
Okay.
get the experts from.
But you don't know how it allocates that as we sit here?
So can you rephrase your question? So you're asking whether the water that is released from sites is allocated to reclamation, or is that the question?
Well, let me back up. the export pumps for the CVP pull directly out of the river 24 hours a day, correct?
I don't know.
The export pumps for the State Water Project pull out of Clifton Court 4 Bay, which is filled, I think, twice a day. Is that correct?
I don't know exactly how they're filled, but yes, I know that those pumping plants, the SWP and CVP.
Sorry. Does it matter which pumping plants are being used as to what effects on South Delta water levels or quality are occurring?
It does matter.
Okay. And would you agree that when the federal project exports water, that has a greater effect on water stage in the South Delta than does water pumped from Clifton Court 4 Bay?
I don't know what are the differences between the export levels between the federal. I don't have the numbers on top of my head, which one is higher. So I couldn't speak to that which one has more effects.
So if there is hypothetically, if there is a difference between impacts resulting from which project does the exports, isn't that important to know in your calculations whether or not the higher impact export is occurring?
So if I rephrase your question, you're asking like whether if there is a higher exports from one of the pumps, would it impact the South Delta water level? Is that the question?
Well, I asked if it's important to your analysis to know which pumps are being used, assuming that the pumps have different effects on stage and quality in the South Delta.
Well, those, I believe, yes, they are individually taken into account. But what we mostly look at when we review the results is the total exports of both combination of SWP and CVP.
Well, let's do another hypothetical then. Let's say that the site's reservoir releases 1,000 CFS for 2 weeks. That water's to go into the Delta for export from the federal pumps, okay? That's the beginning hypothetical. Now, CalSim 2 is a monthly average, right? So its inputs into DSM2 put that 2 weeks of 1,000 CFS into, I'll say 30 days of flow, correct? Not 2 weeks of flow, correct?
Yes, correct. That's the monthly time step model.
So when you run DSM2, it would have the export pumps pumping over a 1 month period, not over a 2 week period. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So aren't there differences in the impacts to stage if the export pumps are pumping the 1,000 CFS over 2 weeks, or it's pumping, what is that? Sorry, you know, a few thousand, or if it's pumping less than 1,000 over a month? Aren't there different impacts there?
So the same volume of water being pumped, one is on a like during a month and one is during 2 weeks. Is that the question?
Yes, but I want you to tell me if I'm making a mistake here. CalSim 2 is telling DSM 2 that 2 weeks of 1,000 CFS is spread over 1 month. Is that correct?
Well, CalSim 2 tells DSM2 that there is this much export happening in this month. So it doesn't tell DSM2 whether it's in 2 weeks or is it in 1 day, or it doesn't tell the duration, but based on a sub-monthly time step.
I believe that's what I just said. So CalSim 2 is telling DSM 2 this much over a month, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But if in fact it wasn't that much over a month, it was that much over 2 weeks, doesn't that mean the pumps were pumping higher than CalSim 2 told them to pump, so to speak?
Objection as vague as the higher what?
Well, I don't think it's vague. It has to be higher, right? If you're taking the same amount of water in a shorter period of time, you have to pump at a higher rate.
Oh, okay, rate. That's what you didn't say.
Sorry. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So in your analysis, do you show DSM-2 outputs that reflect reality? In other words, the two-week pumping, not the lesser rate over a month. Is that anywhere in your outputs?
The outputs are based on the inputs, like the flows and exports are inputs of like inputs to DSM-2 are from CalSim, which are on a monthly basis. So DSM-2 doesn't have any way to know either this 1000 CFS is happening in 2 weeks or in a month. So it's not, no, in the result, we can see whether that's the pumping happened like in the first 2 weeks of the month, or is it over 3 days or 3 like weeks or a month. So there's no way we can know that.
Do the impacts to local diversions change whether or not that 1000 CFS for 2 weeks is pumped in 2 weeks time or over a month time?
There will be a difference, but I cannot comment on this. I believe that site's authority are gonna, based on what I hear, is gonna do the operations based on a day-to-day basis and a real-time operation. So DSM-2 is a simulation model that can simulate and compare the two analysis. It's a comparative analysis. We're not predicting, we're just comparing that this with and without projects, this is gonna happen.
I understand that, and I don't hope I'm not rude, but you do realize I'm trying to criticize through these questions CalSim 2 being used in this instance, right? I'm not attacking you personally. I'm just trying to point things out. But you just answered by saying you understood that sites would operate in a certain way, but what we're discussing is your testimony that's being used to evaluate impacts. And so the question still stands, and that is, aren't the impacts to local diversions greater under the real-time operating scenario that I just set forth rather than on the scenario that CalSim 2 instructed DSM-2 was going to happen?
I cannot say if it's greater or if it's less. It could be different, but I don't know if it's going to be less or higher or lower because we don't know the duration of pumping within that month.
Are you saying that a higher rate of pumping from the Central Valley Project export pumps might not have a greater effect than a lesser rate of pumping?
Objection vague as to impacts.
That's pretty clear.
It's in context, I understand, so I'm going to overrule the objection. Go ahead, Dr. Sadat. If you
asked to that we can see if we can take a break fairly soon. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah.
Take a break anytime we'd like.
Well, let's not take a break now. Dr. Sadat, if you remember the question, if you would please answer it.
So the higher rate, yes, might have higher impact.
Okay, you keep saying things like might and could. If you increase the pumping off of the river, doesn't that necessarily increase the decrease of stage on the river? Isn't that inherent in pumping from a waterway?
I mean, only if you're increasing pumping and everything else remain the same, yes, with a higher rate of pumping, it might be more effect.
You keep saying might, and
it will be more effect, or it would be.
Thank you. And that's in your testimony, or you talk about the export pumps have an effect on stage and quality in the South Delta, correct?
I'm saying that, yes, that could affect, and then that's why they have those temporary barriers in the South Delta to minimize those effects.
Hey, let's go back to that. You're not familiar with the actual structure that the barriers that the barriers are made of, correct? But you do know that there are barriers, right?
Right.
Do you know if they go in at the same time every year or not?
I am not sure what time they operate. No.
I didn't say operation, I said when they go in. So do you know that there's a difference between them being installed and them operating?
Yes, I know. Yes. I don't know.
Okay. And does any of your 82-year averages include months where the barriers are in and are out? At sometimes, excuse me, I said that poorly. Your
We do
82-year, sorry, your 82-year modeled time frame is broken down into months in many of your outputs, correct? And so do you know if any of the months that you separated out include both times when the barriers are in and when they're out, depending on the year?
I did not look at the results to a specific when they were in and out. I know those barriers are included, but I did not break down the results based on the barriers.
Wouldn't it adversely affect the results if you're averaging months that include sometimes the barriers in and sometimes they aren't?
That is for sometimes they are in, sometimes they're not. Yes, I agree.
Okay. Now, the barriers also contain culverts. Do you understand that? And a culvert is a pipe running through the rock barrier they've installed. You understand that?
I believe you.
Okay. And then those culverts have flap gates so that when the tide comes in, the water can go upstream. And when the tide turns, the flap gates shut, and then the water doesn't flow downstream generally. Is that how your understanding of how the barriers work?
Yes.
Okay. So the barriers also, because they are across the channel, they actually decrease the amount of tidal water that flows upstream. Is that correct?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
The barriers are across the stream and have few culverts in them. So the water that moves upstream of the tide can only go through the culverts. You agree with that?
I think so. Yeah.
So given that there's a barrier with culverts and not an open channel, the barriers actually prevent some of the tide from flowing upstream. Is that correct? The picture's freezing. I don't
Yes,
know
it
if...
might have.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Sadat, did you say
Can
yes?
you hear me? Yes.
Okay.
And Mr. Herrick, is this a good time to take? I don't want to stop you in the middle, but we are coming up almost on 2 hours. Is this you?
That's a good time.
Break. Okay. And 2 hours, not just you. I meant 2 hours in our day. Let's go
I
ahead.
can take 2 hours anytime you want.
Let's go ahead and take our afternoon break. And we'll come back at 3:40. It gives us 13 minutes. Come back at 3:40 and we'll pick up. Thank you. And please remember to mute and turn your video off if you don't want anyone to hear you or see you on your break.
Mr. Miko, can you hear me?
I can.
This is said friendly, in a friendly manner. When you talk, you normally trail off at the end of your sentence, and that's when people can't hear you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll look to our court reporter. Are you ready for us to get back on the record?
I'm ready to go. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And with that, it's back to you, Mr. Harris.
Yes, and off the record, I would just like to say I look completely washed out and white in this camera view. So I was hoping there was a filter that could give me some color. Not just you. Guess not. Anyway, back on the record. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Dr. Sadat, we were talking about the temporary barriers before we took our break. And so I just want to follow up on that. As you said, the barriers are installed to some degree mitigate the effects of the export pumps on stage and quality. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Do you know what the specific effects of the export pumps are on stage and quality in the South Delta?
I do not.
So do you know whether or not, or to what degree the barriers mitigate those effects?
I do not. I did not see any reports in that regards.
Okay. Would that be important to your analysis to know whether or not and to what degree the barriers are mitigating export pumps effects?
Well, I guess I mentioned this before, that this is a comparative analysis, and regardless of the existing, I mean, if there is any water level issues, if they exist in the Delta, it's going to be for in both baseline and sites alternative. So my analysis was just to look at the sites effect on the water levels. So I'm not aware of like existing situations right now in the specific situation in the with water levels.
Okay, well, we touched on that before, so let me explore that. You understand that farmers divert from the Delta channels for agricultural purposes?
Yes, I do.
And I'll represent to you that most of the South Delta uses pumps, and the pump is in the river itself. Do you understand that?
I don't know the exact locations.
That's all right. I'm just, but the principle of a pump in the river pumps water out of the river. So one of the factors in the ability of that pump to operate would be the stage, the water level. Is that correct?
Can you please repeat that?
The ability to use a pump to take water out of a river is dependent upon, among other things, the stage of the water in the river, correct? How high it is.
Yes.
So that if it's some distance above the intake, then the pump can operate, correct?
Objection vague.
If the water level is some distance above the intake of the pump, then the pump is not impacted by that water level, correct?
In general, yes.
Okay. Now, would you agree that another factor is the depth of the channel, not just the stage? In other words, the stage could be at 2 feet plus mean sea level, but if the channel bottom is 1.9 mean sea level, you only have an inch of water, right? Or 2 inches of water.
Can you say that again?
So not only is stage important in there being enough water to divert from through a pump, but the depth is important too, correct?
Well, I haven't done any analysis on the pumping and how they works. So my analysis, like DSM-2, yes, it includes those pumping experts, the volume of experts, and also it includes the barriers, but I'm not aware of the details, like how the pumping works or how those barriers operate. So I don't know that.
I understand. But you've said that the DSM-2 results are for comparative purposes, correct?
Correct.
Not
Between
to-
the scenarios, between the alternatives.
Yes, sorry for interrupting. Not to predict actual numbers, correct? Or actual conditions, let me put it that way.
Yes, they're not predictive for the prediction purposes.
So how do you determine if the difference between scenarios is in reality an important or is an adverse effect or not knowing how deep the channel is?
Can you please rephrase the question? I'm not sure if I understand.
Yes, let's make a hypothetical, okay? DSM-2 thinks that the channel is 6 feet deep, okay? Somebody's got a pump in that channel, and DSM-2 also says what stage it's at. So its stage is at some level, and it has a certain depth of 6 feet, okay? That's the hypo, is that all right? You understand?
Okay.
Okay, now let's add 10 years of silt, and so now the channel is 1 foot deep, not 6 feet deep. Okay, you understand that part of the hypothetical?
Okay, I understand.
So when you have a comparison that says there's a 1.2-inch difference in stage, does that make a difference if the channel is 6 feet deep or 1 foot deep?
The comparison is when the channels have the same depth. So they both, like, for when I'm saying there's one, like a tenth of a foot, 1.2 inches difference between the minimum water levels, considering the same channel geometry in both scenarios. And nowhere in my testimony I say that whether this is significant or not. I just concluded that there is this much differences between, like, 1/10 of a foot difference between the minimum water levels. And I did not say anywhere in my testimony that's whether it's significant or not.
Do you know of any other witness in the on the applicant's team here that is going to make those conclusions?
I
Objection
cannot
called.
speak to that.
Okay. Would it be important to any conclusion about impacts caused by the project to know whether or not some channels have substantially degraded so that they're much shallower? Would that be important to know?
Again, this is a comparative analysis. I'm comparing the two scenarios, and DSM-2 has been used like over like 20 to 30 years in the delta to simulate the water levels and salinity in the delta. Yes, we understand the limitation of the models. We understand that CalSim model is a monthly time step model that fits into DSM-2, but this is the best available tool for this kind of planning analysis to give us an idea of the changes and the direction of the changes, whether there are increases or decreases. And that's what my analysis is about. And
Okay,
whether we are seeing any big impacts with size or not, which based on the analysis, I'm saying the minimum water level, only the differences I saw was 1/10 of a foot.
But aren't we trying in this process? Aren't we trying to determine whether or not other water right users are adversely affected? Correct.
I'm going to object as argumentative and calls for a legal conclusion. And
All right. Well, I'll try another tack here. What's the date of the bathymetry in the DSM-2 version that you used?
Again, I can't remember when the version was released or the exact date of the bathymetry.
Has DWR informed you that there are numerous soundings taken since that version that include new bathymetry for the South Delta?
I don't recall that I've been informed, like DWR informed me.
Would the best available science for your purposes be using bathymetry that reflects the current condition of the delta channels?
So the version, I guess we're back to why I use this version. Is that this question again, that why we use version 806 with this bathymetry? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm asking you if the best available science would be using DSM-2 that has current bathymetry for South Delta channels.
I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know which version of DSM-2 has updated bathymetry, so I could not answer to that question. To my knowledge, the version that was available at the time, which we could use, and it's been used before and after for like long-term operations and biological opinions. It was version 806, which I explained that the reasons that why that version was chosen. And that was what it was available at the time.
Yeah, but that's not my question. My question is, would the best available science be using a DSM-2, whatever version, that has current South Delta channel bathymetry in it?
So you're asking if there is a version that has the current, so are you asking me whether it exists, or I'm not sure if I understand the question.
No, let me say it again. Would you consider it the best available science for the purposes of this hearing to use a DSM-2 that has current South Delta bathymetry in it? Isn't that better than having a version that doesn't have current?
I'm not sure if that would make a like huge difference, since it's used in the same geometry, is used in both baseline and the size project alternative.
So in your expert opinion, if Middle River is now 1/3 as deep as it used to be, the difference is running a model with those current conditions won't be any different than running the model when it's 6-8 feet deep?
I guess we're back to this is a comparative analysis.
Okay, well, let me approach this a different direction. Could we pull up sites 252, please? And 252 is the response plan for water level concerns in the South Delta that you reference in your testimony on page 7 of sites 110. And I assume you're familiar with that. You reference it.
This is the Can you say the number again, please?
The response plan, according to your testimony, is sites 252.
I looked at it. I did not read the whole document. I just looked at it very briefly a long time ago.
Okay, and are you aware that, let me see, if we can pan down to the second page of the plan itself, this is the cover. There you go, next page. Next page. Right there. Excuse me for yelling. And so let me represent to you, Dr. Sadat, that right there under the paragraph says forecast procedure, the water level response plan requires DWR and the Bureau to forecast what the water levels will be so they can predict whether or not a transfer can occur. Is that your understanding of that paragraph?
I need time to read it.
Okay, go ahead. And that paragraph continues on the next page. I don't know if we can get them both there.
We can't have two, this sounds silly and I don't mean it in a silly way, but I don't think we can show both pages at the same time.
Okay, no problem.
So
Anyway,
did you want me to read the whole paragraph?
No, I wanted you to read it to yourself so I can ask you a question.
Okay.
And then let's move to the next page, the top of the page, please, Ms. Mullen. Let me know when you're done, Dr. Sadat. I'm not trying to rush you.
Yes, I read through this. I just, yeah.
Okay. And then the next paragraph, I'll read. It says water levels are considered adequate if they are forecasted to be 0.0 feet mean sea level or greater at two locations and 0.3 feet mean sea level greater at another two locations. You see that next paragraph?
I said, yes.
Okay. So is it your understanding that the water level response plan is asking DWR and the Bureau to actually predict whether or not water levels are above a certain point, rather than just do a comparison about where they might be between two different scenarios?
I cannot make that conclusion because I haven't read the whole document. I feel like I need to read the whole things before I can speak on any specifics of what it means. And
okay, you do say
on,
sorry. Are you done?
yeah, based on one paragraph, I could not form any opinion on this one.
On in your testimony, which is cites 110 on page 7 at the end of paragraph 23, you say, additionally, exports of non-CVPSB water are subject to the operation of the water level response plan. You see where you say that?
Let me find it. Can you please repeat the paragraph?
It's the end of paragraph 23 in your cites 110.
Okay, yes, I see that.
Right. So I take that sentence that you wrote there to mean that as part of your analysis, you're assuming that barriers and the water level response plan protect South Delta people from the impacts of exports. Is that what you meant by that?
I meant that those temporary barriers, that's what I've had there, are just DWR operate those to minimize those water level impacts, potential impacts to Delta water levels.
So you mentioned the water level response plan because it's a method by which local diverters are protected against exports? Is that what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying. No, sorry, I don't understand. I'm just basic, like simply saying what it's in my testimony. I did not understand your interpretation of this sentence.
Well, what does that sentence mean to you then? The last sentence of paragraph 23. I didn't understand your answer.
That exports of non-CVP and SWP water are subject to the operations under the water level response plan. That's what I mean.
Well, aren't you referring to transfer water?
Which part do you mean I'm referring to trans? Are you specifically pointing to a certain word in this sentence?
Oh, we're not communicating here. You say additionally exports of non-CVP SWP water. Doesn't that mean transfer water? Is that what you mean by that?
Well, I guess it says down there that exports of side water is not a transfer. It's treated in a similar manner.
Okay, but doesn't that mean the same thing then? Exports of sites water then are subject to the water level response plan. Isn't that what you mean?
The exports of non-CVP waters or water are subject to the operations under the water level response plan.
I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here. We're here talking about, you and I are talking about the export of sites water. And in your testimony, you seem to say that water is, besides those exports, besides being protected by barriers, are protected by the water level response plan. Isn't that why you put that sentence in there?
So, well, okay, what I mean here, so this is, I think it's clear enough that reclamation and DWR are operating those temporary barriers. And then the export of side water and of non-CVP and SWP, which could be site water, are also subject to operations under the water level response plan.
Okay, so your testimony is referencing what you believe is an additional protection to South Delta diverters from exports, correct?
I'm not sure when you're saying additional, because I done addition to what? Like, what is the exact?
In addition to the barriers.
Well, the thing is, I don't know if those barriers are part of this water level response plan, so I couldn't speak to that whether this is an addition to those temporary barriers or not.
What?
Let me jump in here for a moment. Dr. Sadat, do you have an opinion as to whether the water level response plan protects South Delta water users?
I don't have too much information about this document.
I think, Mr. Herrick, I know you are attempting to get to a point. I don't know that we will ever get there. So I think it may be time to move on, but the direction of your questions, I understand. I'm following you.
I appreciate that. Let me just ask one more in a futile attempt here. What was Dr. Sadat, what was the purpose of that last sentence of paragraph 23 in your testimony? I think she wrote it.
that temporary barriers are minimized, they are operated to minimize the potential impacts, and also the water level response plans is also, I mean, the non-CVP unstable tip water are subjects to operate under the water level response plan. So
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite get that.
in addition to the temporary barriers in the South Delta that are to minimize potential impacts to Delta water level users, the non-CVP and SWUP water are subject to operate under water level response plan.
Okay, I'll give up here in a second. Sorry. I didn't ask you what it said, Dr. Sadat. I asked you why you put that in there. Yeah, I assume you did write this. Your testimony?
I did.
Okay. Why did you put that last sentence? Not the sentence with the barriers, the last sentence that references the water level response plan.
Because that's my understanding.
What is your understanding?
Should I read it again? That's
No, please don't. All right, I'll move on.
what I put in my testimony. That's what I understand.
Let's go to SDWA 80, please. That's the recent one I just forwarded yesterday, day before, whatever it was. Bring it up on the screen. And as that document's coming up, we just covered the water level response plan, and it discusses, it discusses the obligation of DWR and the Bureau to provide modeling results ahead of any transfer. And we believe that transfer water conditions apply to sites, but they're required to provide modeling results ahead of time and then during the transfer, so that people can evaluate the impacts of that transfer. So the first page, and these are just excerpts from 15 years of DWR modeling that they've sent to me every time there's a transfer. So I don't represent that these are comprehensive in that they include everything or that they're necessarily representative of everything, but I just pulled these out for purposes of discussing DSM-2. So you see the first page of that is modeling differences on a bar chart for stages at the end of East Grantline Canal. Do you see that, Dr. Sadat?
What are the time steps in these? Like, are these long-term averages? What are these differences?
If you go to the bottom, it has a daily amount. So these are daily numbers, I guess.
I can't read.
Can we zoom in a little further? Is that possible without losing text? Thank you.
And so this with and without transfers, can you explain what that means?
This appears to be a bar chart showing how much less, how much less is the stage resulting from the transfer as opposed to the baseline.
Transfer of what?
The transfers of water that are dealt with in the water level response plan.
I'd like to object as the lack of foundation. Mr. Herrick just introduced this document and is asking questions, and I don't think Dr. Sadat's even ever seen this.
I think that's fair. And I don't know. I know you explained what this is, Mr. Herrick, but I didn't understand it. Is this a chart that you compiled?
No, the water level response plan requires DWR and the Bureau prior to any transfer to produce modeling results predicting.
I understood that part. So you received this figure from DWR.
Yes.
I see.
The reason it's a bar chart and not a line is because they kept sending me lines that are color coded, and some of us are colorblind. So they put a bar chart in here so I could visually see what the modeling predicts for for changes in stage between having the transfer and not having the transfer. And this happens to be in the year 2021, in the month of August through September.
Right. And then your line of question, where are we going with the line of questions?
Well, this is very basic on this one. Dr. Sadat, you can see that the model predicts on the very first bar a minus 0.4 inch change, correct?
Well, wait, I mean, we don't know. We've never, I don't know. I don't know what this is. And Dr. Sadat, well, you told me it's something you received from DWR, but I don't. You're representing that we do need to break this down. This may take longer than you would like, Mr. Herrick. First of all, the modeled stage, that's according to which model? DSM, I assume we're talking about DSM-2? Is that, are you all representing
this
those?
Is all this is all DSM-2, correct?
Okay. And then without transfers, you're representing that is these exports of non-CVP SWP water. Is that what we're talking about, or we're talking about any, what does transfer mean here? Let me pause. I have tried to avoid the delta in my career, okay? And I did that because it's hard, and I really enjoy that now I'm in the middle of it. But don't assume, you should assume a basic level of knowledge about these delta specific issues. I would like to think I'm fairly intelligent and I can come up to speed quickly. So as a term, obviously transfer, I think there's a language here that all of you are talking to each other. And I want to make sure I understand what's being exchanged. The word transfer here, to your understanding, Mr. Herrick, means what? If I can ask, please.
During certain times, the Bureau and/or DWR can pump transfer water, which means it's not their normal pumping, but somebody has purchased water from somebody upstream and they're pumping it for the transfer.
So it's water that is not subject to, that is not being diverted pursuant to DWR and the Bureau's water rights. Is that?
Unless the Bureau or DWR bought the water.
Well, if they bought the water, it's not their water rights. It's water they bought under someone else's water right, right?
Right.
Okay. Okay. I'm really just trying to get an understanding of what we're talking about. Okay.
That's
Thank
okay.
you.
Let me go back, and I'm sorry if I'm wasting time here.
No, you're not.
D 1641, the current water quality control plan under which we operate generally, anticipated export pumping by the projects, either together or separately, of water other than that water they do under their rights. And so it had provisions to supposedly provide protections for local diverters in the South Delta due to the additional exports that the transfer would result in.
Understood.
One of those conditions was a water level response plan. One of those conditions was a water quality response plan. The water level response plan, which we just briefly touched upon with Dr. Sadat, it lays out the framework for how to deal with the export pumping's effects on South Delta under a transfer. Part of those conditions in that water level response plan are DWR, the Bureau, has to model what's going to happen with the transfer. And those results are then compared to certain set numbers to see if the transfer will result in water levels below those certain set numbers. And so this is one of the hundreds of modeling results DWR sent to me over the years, which shows their modeling describing the effects of a transfer as opposed to no transfer. So this anticipates a transfer starting on 9/1, September 1st of 2021. And the modeling that DWR said is in those bars. And so they predict that on the first day of the transfer, the water level at this point, would be minus 0.4 inches less than if there was no transfer.
I see that. And I know, and I'm going to apologize to the rest. I invited, apparently, I think I actually did, Mr. Herrick to explain that to me, and I do appreciate it. And with that, let's go back to our traditional cross-examination. Back to you, Mr. Herrick.
Thank you. And Dr. Sadat, I'm not trying to test you on the specifics of this, but I'm using this and the further pages as examples to question DSM-2. So you can see that first bar, Dr. Sadat, which says minus 0.4, correct?
Yes, correct.
And that means minus 0.4 inches according to the x-axis up there, right?
Yes.
Okay. So do you know where the east end of Grantline Canal is? Generally?
Generally, yes, I can.
So that's 8 to 10 miles upstream or away from the CVP pumps, correct?
I don't know that.
Okay. Well, let's just assume it's 8 miles away. And DSM-2 calculates 0.4 of an inch difference. Would you agree with that? That's what it's saying here anyway.
That's what I see in this graph.
Okay. 0.4 of an inch is what? 5 sheets of paper thick or something like that? Do you agree with that?
Mr. Herrick, 5 sheets. Wait a minute. I object to that question. 5 sheets of paper.
Well, let me withdraw that. I was just making. Dr. Sutter, are you confident that the model can predict a stage, let's say 8 miles away down to the 10th of an inch?
Tenth of an inch.
All right,
I
well,
really
let's move on. I'll
Yeah.
deal with this on rebuttal. The next page, please. And here I provided one of the charts graphs that they provide. DWR's also provided. This one's in 2017. And as you can see, it has historic, which is the measured EC. And then it has a base case of the pumps. Anyway, you can see that the 2 lines are pretty close. And so it looks like the model is useful, correct?
Can we, I'm sorry, can we scroll down a little bit so we can see thank you. I just want to make sure I saw the full
Oh, sorry.
key
Anyway,
there.
I just provided this to show that I'm not completely dishonest and that the model sometimes looks like realities. Let's go to the next page.
Well,
Mr. Herrick,
I'd like to lodge a motion to strike that Mr. Herrick simply testified about this graph without any question. I'm not.
That's sustained.
All right, let's go to the next one. Now, Dr. Sadat, do you see that, excuse me, I'm colorblind, is it the blue line that is the historic EC? You see that?
I see the line, yes.
And then the other line is both lines, the with the transfer and the without the transfer. You see that?
I see that. I don't understand it though. What does it mean that one line shows with and without transfer?
Well, if the 2 lines are together, that means that there's no difference.
No, Mr. Herrick, I'm confused too. The bottom key says with JPOD and without JPOD for the same color.
Yes, they've apparently produced results that have no differences, and so there's one line. If it's both scenarios on one line, then there's no difference.
Objection. I'm really concerned about the lack of foundation and not having the complete document. The witness is being asked to look at excerpted pages with really no understanding of this document. And what I understood Mr. Herrick to just say was, this is an excerpted page from, and it looks like a different year, obviously, from a different document. And it just seems that this totally lacks any foundation for the witness to give meaningful answers to.
I'm going to sustain this objection. Mr. Herrick, I think you already pointed out. Let's get to this on rebuttal if it's not part of your case in chief testimony, and put someone up here who can explain this chart. And if necessary, we can have Dr. Sadat talk about it at that time. If it's I just don't think this is productive, and I would like someone with knowledge of this chart to tell me about it.
Okay, I'll obviously defer to the hearing officer's decision. Let me ask this question, Dr. Sadat, is it your understanding that DSM-2 is not very accurate in predicting salinity in the South Delta?
That's not my understanding.
It's not. Okay.
My volume's off.
Excuse me while I move.
Sorry, is there somebody talking? I'm not sure what's happening.
I think someone is not on mute who may want to be on mute. I'm not sure who that was.
Dr. Sadat, the DSM-2 model includes inputs for, excuse me, let me start. Does the DSM-2 model include inputs based upon gauges in the South Delta? And by gauges, I mean measuring devices for either water quality or stage.
DSM-2 has EC boundary conditions. Which one is EC at Vernalis, which is from CalSim, CalSim 2. And then EC at Martinez, which is another boundary condition input to DSM-2.
So does DSM-2 not, excuse me, does the DSM-2 run, do the DSM-2 runs you performed not include any actual gauge data in the South Delta?
I'm not 100% sure if the boundary conditions are, because this is, we are talking about the planning simulation, correct? Not the historical simulation.
I'm talking about your runs that you produce comparing sites with the no project alternative.
Which is a planning simulation.
Good.
I don't think the boundary conditions are gauge data. No.
In your, excuse me, in your operation of the DSM-2 model, did you check any gauge stations to see if the DSM-2 results were the same as the model specified?
I did not.
On, let's see. Excuse me, on page. On your testimony, which is sites 110. And then I'm looking at page 5, which is paragraph 12, or paragraph 12, which is on page 5. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we'll get to the slides in a minute here, but you say that the results between the NAA and alternative 3 are very similar. Do you see where you say that in the first sentence?
In general, yes.
Okay. And again, the CalSim 2 provides monthly inputs to DSM-2, correct?
The flow, yes, inputs from CalSim.
And then
but DSM-2 has, sorry, go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Then DSM-2 produces 15-minute intervals of results, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so you took those 15-minute increments, correct? Excuse me, you took those 15 minutes, came up with a monthly average, and then came up with a 82-year average of each of those months, correct?
Correct, just that I mentioned that those CalSim outputs are not the only inputs to DSM-2. DSM-2 has like 15 minutes tidal boundary condition for the stage at Martinez and also EC at Martinez. And yes, the model is run based on a 15 minutes time step, and then we report the results I reported today based on the monthly averages.
Okay. So, but I want to make sure that's clear that the 15-minute interval data was then converted into a monthly average, and then that monthly average was averaged with 82 years of that month, correct? That's how your monthly data is produced.
The monthly is like a long-term average. For example, like our October average is averages of all Octobers in the 82 years.
Is that a yes? Let me say it again. DSM-2 produces 15-minute data intervals, I'll say. And then you took the 15-minute intervals per day. Then you came up with a monthly average of that. And then you took 82 monthly numbers and averaged those, correct?
We
Back to compound. Can we break it down?
I thought that was breaking it down.
Will you please break it down, Mr. Herrick, one step at a time and walk us through this process?
Certainly. Dr. Sadat, the DSM-2 produces 15-minute intervals of data outputs, correct?
correct.
And then for your testimony, you took that 15-minute data, those 15-minute data intervals, and came up with a monthly average for each month, correct?
We take daily averages from those 15 minutes data, and then we take monthly averages from those daily averages.
Okay, but I was just asked to break it down, so let me go through those one at a time. So the 15-minute data became a monthly or a daily average?
Daily, then monthly.
Then monthly. And then you took 82 months, which is the period of the analysis. You took those 83 months averages and averaged it to that final product, correct?
For the results I showed in my presentation today. Yes, I presented results in a monthly time steps.
Okay. So those 82 years of data, right? There are wide swings of actual occurrences, correct? So
Can you explain what you mean by?
You could have an October that's wet and you can have an October that's dry, correct?
Yes.
In the 82-year historic record.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what's the purpose of averaging a wet October flow with a dry October flow?
So this is just the long-term averages that I presented in this testimony, but all the appendices that we presented results for salinity and like the results of DSM-2, we also presented the results in an exceedance plot that also it's breakdown by water year type. So we have presented those
I'm so
results.
sorry. I was not able to follow that. But if you could repeat that, and forgive me.
Sure. I was just saying that's not the only results we looked at. We looked at the exceedance plots that it considers the whole range in the 82 years, including like the maximum and minimums. And we also break it down by water years. So we looked at wet years, above normal years, dry year, critical dry years. So it's just, we looked at the whole range of data. This is not the only way that we presented data. It's just, I showed those results today because just for simplicity.
Well, again, the question is, why would you show an 82-year average of averages as part of your presentation? What does that convey to the audience as to the effects of the project when you give a 82-year time step average? What does that mean?
That's one way of showing the results, that there are not differences. Even if we break down the results, we do not see much differences if we break down by wet years, water, like different water year types. And I did not just want to include all those graphs in my testimony. And this is like one of the ways to show the results is based on a long-term average.
Okay, you keep answering me with
And
what instead of the
will-
why question. Why did you choose to show all these averages rather than something like, here's a time frame that has the greatest impacts on water levels?
Objection asked and answered and argumentative.
That was not asked and answered.
She said for simplicity.
He did say that, and Mr. Herrick, I was listening for that. Mr. Herrick framed his question differently, so overruled in this case.
So Dr. Sadat, why did you, if I may repeat, why did you present 82-year averages, results for 82-year averages, rather than present results for, say, the times of greatest effects on water stage in the South Delta?
Because that would not have mattered if I wanted to show by water year categories. The results were very similar, and there wasn't any point of showing more data in a graph to make it more complex. It was just for the simplicity. I decided to show these because there were not much differences if I wanted to break it down.
Well, an average by its definition means there are times when it was less and there are times when it's more, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So again, the question is, why not show us?
Mr. Herrick, now it is asked and answered.
But
We have an answer.
she doesn't answer it, madam.
She's
Madam
answering
Chair.
based on her opinion. I can understand you disagree with the answer. But
Well, there's a reason why she didn't present when it's worst, right? I mean, we're trying to get at the issue of what are the impacts? And the impacts aren't
Well,
an average impact. The impacts are specific.
Mr. Herrick, that's enough. Thank you.
All right.
Let's move on. You will have your chance to present this information. I think the best way for this information to get put in the record is directly through case in chief, where you can present it to me.
Okay. Let's go to your sites 256, which references which has various charts and modeling results graphically shown. And let's see. Excuse me, I'm on the wrong page here. So sites 256, slides 19 through 22. Let's go to that. And as that's coming up there, Dr. Sadat, you say in your testimony that CalSim 2 operates to meet D1641 water quality objectives, right?
right.
Okay. That's not correct with regard to South Delta salinity objectives, is that? Would you agree with that?
Can you please repeat the question?
CalSim 2, do you agree with the statement that CalSim 2 does not operate to make any operational changes in order to meet South Delta salinity standards?
I don't think no, I don't think I agree with that.
Really? Okay. Okay, we're on slide 19, which again is discussed in your paragraph 24 on your testimony sites 110. And this shows for Old River near Middle River, the minimum differences in stage in feet. The first box does. You see that?
Yes, I see that.
Okay. Now this covers all months of the year And I think in most of the months, there are some or minimum amount of impacts listed, correct? Excuse me, stage differences listed, correct?
These are the minimum differences between, yes, the stage.
Okay. Now, in paragraph 23, you say site's water may be moved to the delta from July through November. You see that? That's the first sentence on your paragraph 23.
Okay.
So why are there differences in other months if the exports are only in July through November?
So, I mean, the only differences I see are in December, right? So are you talking about those? Why are we seeing differences in December?
Well, there's December differences, and then you go to the next one, and there are differences in January and February and March. I don't see any in April. There's May, nothing in June. So we have, depending on which one we're looking at, we have differences in months that you say they're not going to export sites water. Can you explain why that is?
It could be other parameters are affecting stage.
Well, wouldn't the base case, well, if the base case should be the same during times when they're not pumping sites water, shouldn't it?
Can you please say that again?
This is Mr. Whittington. Is it okay if I just chime in?
Sure.
And, just to clarify, that something that might be helpful to this question is that the inputs that DSM2 is receiving from CalSim are like you said, there's not going to be releases necessarily from sites in those months that we're seeing changes, but the CalSim model is this is going to reflect changes from sites operations that and these effects may contribute to changes in upstream storage conditions. And it's a large, complex linear program model. So there might be some additional incidental effects on operational decisions made by the model. So the inputs in terms of flows that that is being fed into DSM2 from CalSim are going to show minor effects to flows. So DSM2, which is corresponding to CalSim outputs, is going to also have those corresponding effects, if that makes sense.
I won't answer that last part of your question. Are you saying that changes in flows on the Sacramento River pursuant to sites can result in lower water levels in the South Delta in months when they're not pumping sites water?
I mean, we could speculate exactly how those changes occurred, but I'm saying that the sites project operations are going to have an effect on upstream conditions, for example, storage conditions, that may then have an effect on the amount of water that can be supplied south of Delta.
Okay. Dr. Sadat, excuse me, the two, I guess, charts here that we're looking at on this page, they have long-term averages and then water year types, wet, above normal, below normal, dry, and critical, correct?
Correct.
Are the numbers in those boxes 82 years averages of minimums, or is it specific dates or specific instances of that's being the absolute minimum?
The daily values these are differences. Like we took the differences between the daily values and then we took averages of those, which includes like in the long-term average, it has all 82 years. And for the wet years has only the wet years. We took average of only the wet years.
Okay, so this isn't a list of the minimum differences. This is a list of the averages of minimum distances, not distances, I'm sorry. This isn't a list of the decreases in stage. It's the average of decreases in stage for those various categories, correct?
Yes, these are the averages of
Okay.
minimum difference.
And then the next page, which is 20, is Middle River at Tracy on the top, Middle River at Tracy on the bottom, and again, minimum and maximum. And again, those are all average numbers then, with the description that we gave before, you know, per year or per long-term growth together.
Yes.
Okay. And then the next page is Grantline Canal upstream of the barrier and Grantline Canal upstream of the barrier. See that? That's correct, isn't it?
All right, can you say that? I didn't hear you.
These two charts are titled Grantline Canal upstream of the barrier minimums and Grantline Canal upstream of the barrier maximums, correct?
Yes, so these aren't okay. Yeah, yes, that's what it is.
And without getting there, the next page has Old River upstream and downstream of barrier. Why don't you have all three barrier datas rather than just Grantline Canal and Old River?
I might have not included it. I don't have an answer to that question. There's no specific reason.
Okay, and I'm not trying to be critical here, but it's not that you might not have included, you didn't include it, correct? And if you don't know why, that's fine. But I'm just trying to be clear in the record that there, for whatever reason, you didn't include upstream and downstream of the Middle River barrier, correct?
The Old River near Middle River. And then we have the Middle River at Tracy. Grand Line. So we have the Grand Line. We have the Middle River. And then the Old River near Middle River. I believe this is the third one, right? So what is it missing again?
You give us data for upstream and downstream of two of the barriers, which Grantline Canal and losing my page already. And Grantline Canal upstream and downstream of the barrier, and Old River downstream and upstream of the barrier. But you didn't give us Middle River upstream and downstream of the barrier. And I was just asking why, and I think your answer is you don't know why. Is that correct?
Well, I think the Old River near Middle River is the third location. I mean, I included 3 locations, and those are.
I'm sorry, you broke up for me. I think the Old River and near Middle River location.
The old river near Middle River is the,
Okay, let me cut through this because we're getting bogged down here. There is a Middle River location, but you don't provide below and above the Middle River barrier. I was just asking why.
Mr. Herrick, just to make sure I'm following, I don't see two locations upstream and downstream of Grand Line Canal. Upstream of the barrier on Grand Line Canal, that is.
That's slide 21 or figure 21, whatever.
So slide 21 includes
Grant Line
Grand
Canal
Canal
upstream of the
upstream.
barrier and Grant
Yeah.
Line Canal
upstream of
upstream
the
of the
barrier.
barrier.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you guys were both speaking.
Yes, I apologize. I may have misspoken. This one gives minimums, excuse me, slide 21 gives minimum and maximum differences for Grant Line Canal upstream of the barrier.
Each slide. Oh, sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead, John.
Slide 22 is Old River downstream of the barrier and Old River downstream of the barrier. Okay, so my question is, and I was inartful before, if not wrong, why did you not present data for upstream and downstream of each barrier rather than upstream and downstream of rather than what you did?
well, I mean, would it be okay if Mr. Miko could answer to this question?
Well, if he prepared these charts,
He was involved in this analysis.
okay.
I mean, if he wants to give an answer.
Sarah, could you repeat your question, please?
I guess the supposition here, which I want you to correct if I'm wrong, is that I don't see the basis for the selection of the data points that you've provided. Is there a reason why you didn't provide upstream and downstream of each of the barriers to show what the effects are of the project?
I guess with respect to these results, I don't know if our conclusions would differ with those additional locations.
That's not the question. The question is, why do you provide upstream of one barrier and downstream of the other? Why don't you do upstream and downstream of all three barriers?
I don't have a simple answer for you.
Okay. Okay. Next are
And Mr. Herrick, as you're thinking about this, we are at 4:48. So it may be that you can tell me this is an appropriate time for us to break until we meet again, depending on how large of a block you're planning to jump into next.
yeah, I'm not trying to waste time, hearing officer Kenzie, but this probably would be a good time because I do have more than 10 minutes or whatever's left.
Right. I think that makes sense. I think we've all had a long day too. So
Okay.
thank you, Mr. Herrick. We will pick up with you. And thank you to this panel. I know it's been a long day for you as well. And the plan is that we would pick up when we meet again. And I'm going to look through the room to see if there are any procedural issues we need to talk about before we break. But we're meeting again on Tuesday, September 3rd, and that is by Zoom. And we would pick up with this panel and cross-examination starting at 9 o'clock roughly. So thank you to all the witnesses for joining us all day. And then I'll look to the room. Are there any other procedural issues we should address or housekeeping generally before we break until next week?
I have one question just in terms of the panels. Mr. Hitchings, I know you had said that panel
I'm
4
sorry,
was
who was
unavailable.
speaking? I'm
Oh,
I'm not able to follow.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm Eric Busher for Baykeeper. I apologize. I think you said panel 4 was unavailable on next Tuesday, and so we were going to do panel 5 first. Is that still the plan?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. I was going to say that's my understanding, as long as the authority is their understanding. So my understanding is we will pick up with we will hopefully complete panel 3 and then pick up with panel 5 next. Complete panel 5 because I don't think it makes any sense. I think we all agreed it doesn't make sense to interrupt the panels, and then we will move to panel 4 once we're done with panel 5.
My only question, and this may just be naively optimistic on my part, if we finished panel 5 on Tuesday, would your intention be to start panel 6 or to just wait until Friday to do panel 4?
If we finish panel 5 on Tuesday, we probably all earned ourselves a short day.
A reward? All right, great. That helps, and so we can plan for that. And Mr. Hitchings, I owe you estimates for the next couple of panels from our side that I'll get you tomorrow sometime.
Thanks. That's much appreciated. And also, yeah, with the panel 6, I think their expectation was not to be coming as soon as next Friday. I think that's the 9th. So I like the hearing officer's thinking on that. If we're that efficient, we've earned a golden ticket, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Ornbaum.
So on Tuesday, we're going to finish the cross-examination of panel 3.
That's correct. We will start with that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other procedural questions? All right. With that, I truly want to thank all of our witnesses and for being here. I know these are long days and a lot of questions, and I appreciate your testimony. And I hope all of you have a good Friday, and I will see you, and a good long weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.